Hey guys, Uncle Joel here with Pen and Reel, and today I want to talk about Berserker Unbound by Jeff Lemire and Mike Deodato Jr. Now, I've long been a big fan of Jeff Lemire, ever since I first picked up Essex County at the library. Now, this was one of the first comics that I ever read that showed me that the medium could do far more than just the typical superhero stuff. I grew up reading a lot of different DC comics, specifically Superman, and so most of what I was familiar with was just superheroes. But then I read Essex County, and it made me cry. And prior to this, I didn't even realize that was possible from a comic. So I instantly had a deep love and appreciation for Jeff Lemire, specifically because of Essex County. And then from there, I've had a long appreciation for the different works that Jeff Lemire puts out, particularly his creator-owned stuff, like Black Hammer, Sweet Tooth, Descender, and so on. And I found that his work consistently pulls me in, regardless of the strength of the concept. For instance, the story for Descender is not that deep or that original, but I love Jeff Lemire's writing and he has very strong character work here, and so for Descender, between Jeff Lemire's character work and the art, the book's totally worth reading, regardless of the strength of the concept. As for Mike Deodato Jr., I'm not the biggest fan. I've only read a few of the books that he's put out at Marvel, and while his work is dynamic and engaging, I find a lot of the expressions to be a bit wooden and a bit unusual, and they don't really feel realistic, even compared to a lot of other artists who fall into the more Jim Lee school of art. So I can appreciate Mike Deodato Jr.'s work, but I wouldn't say I'm the biggest fan. But needless to say, Jeff Lemire's coming out with a new book, and so I was excited. And for all of the characters that Deodato could illustrate, this seemed right up his alley. And so for those unfamiliar with Berserker Unbound, the basic concept is, what if Conan the Barbarian got transported to modern-day New York? And that's really all you need to know about the book. Now, it's entirely possible that the story will get much more in-depth in the future, but as it is for the first volume, it's pretty much cut and dry Conan the Barbarian in modern-day New York. And that really brings me to my issue with the book, because unfortunately, I don't really care for this book. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad book. It's just not very compelling. So, while this is not actually Conan the Barbarian, as it's presented so far in the first volume, which is the first 4 issues of the comic, it might as well be Conan the Barbarian. There's not a lot of depth or characterization given to the main character. And then there is one other main character that is introduced in the book that the barbarian meets, and this other character is a homeless man who kind of starts helping him out, and they wind up forming some sort of bond even though they don't speak the same language. But overall, I just didn't find the characters to be that interesting, and you don't get Jeff Lemire's normal depth of character. And I don't think we even get a name for the protagonist, and since they don't speak the same language, I can't even recall if they gave a name for the homeless man, because if they gave a name, they used it once when he introduced himself, and after that, there's no mention again. And while this concept has a lot of potential to be very interesting, they just don't really do much with it. In fact, there is very little time spent in the city, and most of the time is spent on the outskirts, in the woods, or in the trees and the shrubbery of a nearby park. And even that's not entirely clear. And the story is very cut and dry, straightforward, and simple. And while there is a bit of dialogue, it's not an actual exchange between the characters because they don't speak the same language. So you don't really get a lot of the character development that you normally would from dialogue. And unfortunately, I found pretty much the entire volume to be fairly boring and uninteresting. There is a little bit developed towards the end that has the potential to be interesting in the future, but I really don't like that the opening story is this uninteresting. I am hopeful that if there is a Volume 2 that it will be a bit better than this, and I am willing to take the plunge and give Volume 2 a try, but that is solely because it's Jeff Lemire and I want to give him a chance. Honestly, if this was written by most other authors, I really don't think I would be giving Volume 2 a chance. But even with it being written by Jeff Lemire, I don't have a lot of interest, and honestly, I don't have a lot of hope for Volume 2 being better. Because honestly, Volume 2 has to be significantly better for it to be worthwhile. But as I said earlier, it's not bad. It's just nothing special, and it's really not that interesting. Now, it is a cheap first volume, so it might be worth picking up if you're curious, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bad decision to buy it and read it, but at the same time, I wouldn't say you have any need to rush out and get it. Honestly, this book for me is a pass, and I can't really recommend it for anyone. And if you're wanting a book along these lines, I would highly recommend you read Birthright by Joshua Williamson. That book is phenomenal, and I cannot recommend it enough. Or if you're just wanting a Conan-type character, Marvel has a couple of Conan books, and from what little I've read, I'd say they're worthwhile. So yeah, I would say this is one of Jeff Lemire's few misses for me, and it does nothing to ingratiate me to Mike Deodato Jr., and I'm hoping that the next thing I read by Jeff Lemire, or Volume 2 of Berserker Unbound, are better. But for now, please like and subscribe if you want to see more comic book reviews, or just discuss comic books with me in the future. And until then, this is Uncle Joel saying, stay tangible.